Amy Stone is from OSU Extension, Horticulture and Invasive Species. I wondered about whether I should put those two together. Eugene Braig is our OSU Extension Aquatic Ecosystems person, and Jennifer Hilmer is joining us from the Cleveland Metro Park. She is part of those of us who receive your emails when you do reports and then have to verify them. So we're the ones that get the emails. So you're going to hear some details that we need to see from you today. So with that, let me unshare that and share this. Okay, so what I'm going to start with is to kind of give you a background of how we got to having the Great Lakes Early Detection Network. We had some, let's say, instances that caused us to look at a way of using technology. So we're going to talk about the app. You can download the app. I've got the go.osu address there that you can access the app from if you wish. We want you to report what you're seeing out and about. You guys are out probably a whole lot more, maybe not currently, but usually than we are. And so the more eyes we have out on the Ohio landscape, the better off it is to report things. Amy's going to talk a little bit about negative report options, and Eugene and Marne will talk about some of the wildlife aquatic stuff. So what started the process? Well, this large, beautiful pest in Southwest Ohio, in June of 2011, we found Asian longhorn beetle. And for those of us that have been dealing with emerald ash borer and looking at perhaps at that point dealing with thousand canker disease of black walnut, it's like we got to find a way to get our arms around these infestations earlier. So we talked about creating an Asian longhorn beetle app and started looking at what kind of funds would we need, and that was kind of an eye-opener for all of us. So you can see here the four of us kind of sat down and we decided in 2012, as I had reached out to some folks at Bugwood, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute. And we said, you know, we want to do an app. And they were doing apps at that point. And Chuck came back at me and said, how about a regional app? Instead of, he said, I'm trying not to do individual state ones. Let's see if we can do a regional one. And there were several other states that were also looking at doing apps. And so we combined forces and funds and then created the Great Lakes Early Detection Network. So bugwood.org is kind of the hub for the University of Georgia's Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health. I've got you a screenshot here that you can see what some of the things they offer, but they have a lot of different apps. And so if you're looking for something different than what we have here, you might want to just go and check out and see what other apps. They're all free for download, and you've got some options when it comes to looking at different apps. So real quick, what were we looking for? Well, we wanted the GPS so that we knew where things were being found in the state. For Ohio, we require that you attach images, and Marnie will talk about that in her video, but we need to see what you see, and so images are critical. It can be one, it can be more than one. There is an option that if you don't want to use an app on your phone, you can go online, and I'll talk about that later. So you can go from your computer and report, and you can report offline. So when you're out in the field and you're gathering the stuff on your phone, it goes into a queue that you can upload later. So it's not like you have to upload it on your time on your phone. You can wait and upload it when you can connect Wi-Fi somewhere. So that's kind of nice as well. You're not necessarily using all your data at that point. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Marnie and let her go from here.
Okay, so we made this little video partly for this webinar, so we could give you a little walkthrough on how easy it is to use the app. But also, for those of you that are professionals, maybe you have volunteers helping you, so you can use this video afterwards to help train people how to use the app. So fingers crossed everything goes good with the internet. I'm going to share my screen and get this video started.
Hi everyone, my name is Marne Titchenell. I'm the Wildlife Program Specialist for the Ohio State University Extension. I'm out in the woods today to talk to you a little bit about the Great Lakes Early Detection Network app. And we're going to talk about how that app can be used to detect and track invasive species. Invasive species cross many taxa. We're not just talking about plants and insects when we talk about invasive species. There are invasive wildlife species, insects and other invertebrates, invasive diseases, and invasive fish. And the negative impacts that they can have on our ecosystems can get pretty complicated. Thankfully, using the Great Lakes Early Detection Network app is not complicated. It's pretty simple. And it doesn't matter whether you are an expert or not. It doesn't matter if you are gardening or hiking or kayaking or maybe out in the field for your profession, or even in a walk in your neighborhood. You can be using the app to track and report invasive species. So this isn't just an app for natural resource professionals. Anybody can use it, and we hope that everybody does use it. So I'll show you how easy it is.
The Great Lakes Early Detection Network app is available at both Apple iStores and Google Play for Android systems. So here's what it looks like. Now, once you are in the app, you're going to notice a list of options just popped up on my screen here. If you go down to that second one, it says All Species right here, and you click on it, you're going to see a list of all of the different species that you can report on using this app. Okay. Now, it's important to note here that this is a regional app and it's used by several states in the Great Lakes area. So you may see some species on this list that maybe you're not familiar with, or that are not invasive here in Ohio or much of a problem here in Ohio, but they are in other states. So you can scroll through this list to look for the species that you're wanting to report on. You can also use the search function, of course, to type in the species that you're looking for. I'm going to back out and show you one other option. At the very top there, you see species categories. And so if you click on that, it's going to take you right to the taxa that you are looking for. So let's say that you are looking at autumn olive. You can scroll down to shrubs and click on it. And you see autumn olive right there in the middle. And so if you click on it, that brings up the screen to report an observation. And we're going to spend some time talking about this screen and how it works in just a minute. But for now, I'm going to back out because I want to show you one other thing. If you click the little eye here, the little info button, and you'll notice there are info buttons for every single species. If you click on that, then you get a nice overview of the species, in this case, autumn olive. And so lots of great information here for you to learn a little bit more about that plant. You'll also see that there are a collection of images, and these are very helpful for a couple of different reasons. One, if you're out in the field and you need a little help identifying the species you're looking at, maybe you're 90% sure that it's autumn olive, but you're not positive, you can kind of cycle through these pictures and maybe confirm that identification. The other reason why these images are helpful is when you're getting ready to submit a report, you do need to attach several pictures to that report. And those pictures are important because they are what the expert uses to confirm your observation and place it on the map. And so in the case of plants especially, you may be looking at that plant and wondering, okay, what part of the plant should I take a picture of? Now I know for you, natural resource professionals out there, you probably know this, but if you're not quite sure, you can kind of cycle through these images, which really focus on identification characteristics of these different plants. So we have the leaves here, a nice close-up picture of the leaves. We have a picture of the flowers. Here would be the bark. Another picture might be the bud, maybe the leaf scar. So those are some of those features that we would really like you to take a picture of, so we can accurately identify that species. You'll also notice that at the very end of the screen there is a map button. And so once you create an observation and you submit it and it is approved, this is the map that it will pop up on. So I'll just zoom you in here a little bit so we can see Ohio, and you really can zoom in quite a bit using this map to find exactly where those reports were made. Okay, so zoom us back out here. And I'm going to back out and show you one final thing, and that's right here, the species list. So this is kind of a nice little feature within this app where if you click the edit button right here, you are actually able to create your own list of invasive species. So just with simple check marks as you see here. But if you are constantly reporting on certain species, you can put them into your list right here, and it can just give you really quick and easy access to those species. So I just wanted to point that out really quick. Okay, next we are going to talk about how to report an observation.
Okay, so I've found an invasive species that I want to report. And if you notice, I'm right on the edge of a little woodland patch. And on the edges of woodlands is a common place to find this invasive species. So I'm going to switch my camera view so you can see what I'm looking. I'm sure some of you watching this can immediately identify this shrub. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Okay, so what we're looking at here, if you haven't figured it out already, is bush honeysuckle. So I found my invasive species that I want to report. What are the next steps? So go into the app, I would locate the honeysuckle, click on it, and start to fill out that information to report an observation. Now remember, a big part of that is to take pictures. And we talked a little bit about those characteristics that make it easy to identify different plants. Pictures of the leaves and the buds, the fruit or the flowers, the bark. Okay, those are the things that I'm going to be taking pictures of. Keep in mind, you don't have to be 100% positive of the species you're trying to identify. So if you don't know, that's okay. But just take those good pictures, pictures of the plant characteristics that will help the expert identify it. And if they can't, they'll reach out to you and ask for a little bit more information. So those are plants, but what about if the invasive species is an animal? Yes, it's great to get an actual picture of the animal, but that doesn't always happen. Sometimes what we're left with is sign or damage that the animal left behind. And in that case, the same rules apply. Make sure that you're getting good quality pictures. For example, if maybe you found evidence of the viburnum leaf beetle, don't send a picture of a dead viburnum from a ways away, because it's going to be hard to tell if that plant really did die due to the viburnum leaf beetle. Get up close and get a picture of the damage to the leaves that viburnum leaf beetle left behind. Okay, so next we're going to take another look back into the app, and I'll take you through reporting an observation.
Okay, so here we are back inside the app. I'm going to navigate to the species that I located, so that bush honeysuckle. And once I find it, I'm going to click on it. And I'm going to begin filling in these various fields. So first of all, you have a site name right here. And you see a long list of sites, and these are sites that other folks that have used the app have already entered. And so you can go ahead and give your location its name. So if you're surveying a park or a state forest, you can enter it here. And then once you enter it, you'll be able to scroll through and find that name once again. But it is a rather long list, so you might be scrolling for a few seconds. So there it is, Gladshire Woods, and I just named it that because it was the little woodland patch behind my house. Next step is to attach images. And notice that you do have the option to take a picture directly from within the app. You can also upload pictures from the gallery, which is what I'm going to do because I snapped my pictures before I opened up the app. And so I'm uploading several pictures, and you do have that option to upload several pictures. So I'm uploading one of the fruit, one of the bark, another one of the leaves, with my hand there for scale. And I did take one from a little ways away just to give some perspective of the size of that plant. Okay. And there I have my pictures uploaded. Next is location. So if you click on the little map icon, it's going to bring up Google Maps. And now the app is going to use your phone's GPS to plot your location. So you have the option of dropping a point on the map to mark the location of the invasive species. And as you can see here, that's exactly what it did for me. Now I was just reporting a single stem, and so this works well for me. But say you were surveying an area and you came across multiple stems of honeysuckle or tree of heaven or whatever invasive species you happen to find. You have another option to report those multiple stems, and that would be the polygon, which is right here. So if you click on that, and then you go down and you click on freeform, this will allow you to hand draw a polygon around the area. So let's just say that I saw multiple stems of honeysuckle in this area. I can just draw a little rough polygon around it. I click this little check mark right here. It pops up with an area, which is kind of a neat feature. And then if I'm okay with that, I go back up and I click done. Okay, so a nice feature that, prevents you from having to drop multiple points for every stem, and it cuts down on the number of reports too. You can really take a large area into account using this feature. But as I said, I only came across one stem, and so I am going to stick with the point. So I'm going to click done to record that location. And then the rest of these fields are pretty quick. So this one right here, time spent in minutes, you don't have to worry about filling that one out here in Ohio if you don't want to. This was established by a state that was recording volunteer hours. Status, so I have positive marked because I did find that honeysuckle. I was not treating it or removing it, so I'm not going to check the treated button. But note here, you can also click not found. So if you're surveying a certain site and you're not finding an invasive species, which, yay, that's good, right? You can record that using this app as well. And then just estimate, oops, down here, estimate the number of acres. I think I'm going to say about 3 acres for that woodland patch. Density was low. I only came across that one, surprisingly. And then you also have some options, or the option of leaving some notes for the reviewer right there. And then once you are happy with everything, you click the save button right there. Once you save your report, the app is going to take you back to the main menu, but you're not done yet. So if you go back to that main list, you'll see that there's one titled Upload Queue, and this is important. So this is your report, and you still need to upload it. So if you click on that, there is my report, that we just went through, that we just created. And you still need to upload it and click this button here. So once you click that button, the app uploads it to the EDD Maps system, which stands for Early Detection and Distribution Mapping System. It's a web-based mapping system for documenting invasive species and pest distributions. So it takes the reports that we are submitting and it places them on the map. So I like to go in, just make sure that everything that I entered is there, everything looks good. I'm going to click Save, and it's just saying it saved it to the upload queue, and now I'm going to go and I'm going to click Upload. So this is the part that may trip some people up. You do have to be registered with the EDD Maps system. Okay, so if you haven't already registered, you just click the little register button. I have, so I'm going to click the login button, and I'll just have to quickly put in my username and password. Okay, and sign in. So if you haven't done this, don't let this step stop you. It's not difficult. It's just asking for an email and a password to register for this mapping system, and you do it once and you're done. So I have registered, I'm signed in, and I'm going to click Upload. And once it is uploaded, it'll say that your queue is empty.
And that's it. That's how you can use the Great Lakes Early Detection Network app to report invasive species. Every year, we're finding new invasive species. We know that they greatly alter our native landscapes. They negatively impact our native wildlife populations, damage agricultural crops, and threaten our health. So we really do need help tracking these invasive species. We need to get them on the map so we can better manage them. So we hope that you find this app easy to use. One of the goals was to make an easy and efficient app, and hopefully you'll use it on your own property and the lands that you are managing. So good luck, and I have some more reporting to do. Bye.
Okay, so hopefully that came through relatively clear for you. When we have these Zoom webinars, the quality isn't as high as it would be with a video. So just to let you know, we will post this video online, and if you watch it there, it'll be a little bit higher quality, and that's how you can share it with others, with other coworkers and volunteers as well. So I am going to turn it over to Amy, and she's going to share a little bit about negative reporting.
All right, let's see here. Are you seeing my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. So when Marne spoke, she was all about going out and finding these invasive species. There's also an important feature about negative reporting. And so I'm going to talk a little bit quickly about the purpose, why this negative reporting could be important, and end with a case study. So let's begin with the purpose of negative reporting. And as you can see, the photo on the right-hand side, it's one of the categories that you would see when you'd open up the app. So you just scroll down to where it says negative survey. And the reason or the purpose is that all information is important. And so yes, we're encouraging people to get out in the field and look for invasive species, but sometimes it's just as valuable to know if that invasive species isn't there. And so we're hoping to and encouraging people to do some negative surveys, particularly with some of the species that we're trying to track. And so if you think, if nobody sees it, does it mean it's not there? And so, you know, often this happens when invasive species comes in, it's kind of under the radar screen. And so, but if nobody sees it, I mean, it still could be there. And so encouraging people to get out into the field. And then if people are looking but don't document it, does that help? And so I think the case study that I'm going to show will kind of illustrate the importance of the negative surveys. What we want to do is really engage as many people as possible. And the ultimate goal is early detection and rapid response. So why is it important? It's important, again, because we want to know when things pop up, or if you've been into an area and are not seeing that. And so one plant example that we talk about frequently is kudzu. And so we know kudzu is coming up from the south naturally, but then we have these little spots across the state. But if nobody reports it, you know, we don't know for sure where those finds are. Or if you're out and you don't see it, you could do a negative report and we could say, okay, in this particular area, we know that kudzu isn't present. So let's go in and talk about a particular case study. And that case study is spotted lanternfly. Spotted lanternfly is an invasive species that was first detected in Pennsylvania and is continuing to spread. It has not been detected in Ohio yet, but we are really encouraging people to go out and do this survey work. My fingers are crossed that all the surveys that come back in are negative, but we want to be out there and engaging just to make sure that if it is, we find it very early. And so the first thing you need to be aware, really with any species, is kind of the life cycle. And at that point in time, what would you be seeing? And so let's, you know, fast forward into December and January when temperatures are colder, we would be looking for the egg mass. But right now, if we went out into the field, we would likely see fourth instar nymphs and the adults beginning to be active if it were to be here in Ohio. So knowing what stage you're looking for is really important. And then also knowing where the insect has been found or detected. And as you can see, this is a map that was updated earlier this spring. But again, just repeating, as of today, it hasn't been detected or found in Ohio yet. But if we look at Pennsylvania, especially to the far left, so Beaver and Allegheny County, the interest or the concern is that it is right up along the Ohio border. And so just as it kind of jumped to that Beaver and Allegheny County away from that initial find in the eastern part of Pennsylvania, there is concern that it could jump and be in Ohio. And so one of the first things that I did was actually look for a host plant that will see spotted lanternfly, especially the adults being present. And so I did a positive report of Ailanthus or tree of heaven, just illustrating, like Marne had mentioned earlier, some good photos that we know that, yep, that's Ailanthus, that's a positive identification. And then I actually revisit those sites on a weekly basis, scouting for spotted lanternfly. And that's where the negative reporting comes in. And so on the app, again, you go to the negative survey, you click on that button. You're going to go into the list of species. And what you'll see next is that selected species where you'd click on spotted lanternfly because that's what I'm looking for. And you can see that now it's come up both with the common and scientific name. You can indicate if you want to keep track of how many minutes or the time you're spending out in the field, but it's not required here in Ohio. So you just click onto that, and then you're going to hit edit for survey area. And what it's going to take you to is a map. Again, just kind of going through again what Marnie covered earlier, and you can choose the point or the polygon, depending on the area that they're scouting or looking for. So you'd indicate that where it's at, you would hit done. And then that would be hopefully a negative report, one that I didn't find spotted lanternfly when I revisited those ailanthus or tree of heaven. It doesn't necessarily have to be tied to a positive report of the host plant, but that's just the way that I'm doing my scouting and survey work this summer. Just another reminder that those reports that you make, because if you're out in the field making several reports, they're going to go into that queue, and then you'll hit the queue button where you can then view, edit, and then submit those reports. And so that's just a particular example of reporting negatives. And so keep those negatives coming. But if spotted lanternfly is here in Ohio, we want to make sure that we're finding it very early in the infestation. And so if you have any questions, gosh, is it spotted lanternfly or not? You could report that as a positive or a suspect, that then we could do some ground truthing. So hopefully that was just a quick and easy kind of going over how to report negatives. And with that, I'm going to stop my sharing. And I'll turn it over to the next person on the agenda.
Is that me?
Yes, it is, sir.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Eugene Braig. I'm Program Director for Aquatic Ecosystems Extension, so I'm going to specifically address a few things that might be a little different about sampling and photographing some aquatic things. A quick outline of what I'll cover. We'll first talk about collecting aquatic plants. We'll talk a little bit about photographing aquatic plants, and then finally some new species that are being added to the app because they are on the move in Ohio. So first, let's talk about collecting aquatic plants. And this is only here for contrast. So obviously in the water, you'll find a number of things that happen to be green. Some of them are microscopic. I'm not going to be talking about these things, and these things aren't really well covered in the app. Instead, I'm going to talk about what we will call macrophytes. And macrophytes are larger vascular plants. It's a technical term for the larger vascular plants that have organs like leaves and stems and roots. Okay, so when we're talking about macrophytes on the water, we will break them into several categories. The emergent plants are going to be those that have rather rigid stems. They might be growing from shallow water or along the shoreline, but they will have stems that are rigid and can support their weight up into the air. And you approach those very similarly to the way you would approach, for example, the honeysuckle that you saw in the video that Marnie presented. So I'm not going to dwell a lot on emergent plants. Different though, from plants on the landscape are the floating leaved things. These are the things that are rooted in substrate, often in shallow water, and conveniently enough, floating leaf things have leaves that float, right? So things like water lilies and relatives are going to have leaves that are floating on the surface. And moving further out into the water, you might see some plants that are under the water out there. Those are what we would call submerged. So these are the different growth forms that you might collect when you're sampling aquatic plants in the field. Often there's a temptation to just jam a stick under something and try to lift it up with a stick, and that can sometimes be effective, but it is very often futile, especially when we're talking about rooted things. Unless you are at the level of the rooted thing, which would be being in the water in many cases, jabbing a stick into it and then trying to lift the stick will often result in stuff sliding off the end of your stick. There are commercial tools available, forks and rakes. You will find that they will often either be deployed with a long pole or with a line or rope that you can throw the tool out across the stand and then drag the rope back in. And here are a couple examples. Tools like this that are specialized and often sold to professionals, you'll probably find them running between $40 to more than $1,000 in some cases. So there's a large range of things out there. And it might not be right for the amateur collector. There are also ways to do these little do-it-yourself tools, especially regarding rakes. So you can buy a typical bow rake at a hardware store and remove the head, or just buy the head. Or if you're feeling really ambitious, as has been done here, you could actually weld or solder two bow rake heads together, and then again mount them to a rope or a pole, and use that to collect aquatic plants. I think perhaps the most useful tool, and the one that I've probably used the most, are grappling hooks. You can buy commercially made grappling hooks that are often used for climbing, but you can also use them to retrieve aquatic plants. You can often find them available for $20 or around there, sometimes even less. You can also improvise them with things like coat hangers, PVC, some kind of weight like clay jammed into a PVC tube, etc. So you can do DIY your grappling hooks as well, but a real professionally made grappling hook is a relatively cheap tool, often clocking only around $20. If you happen to be out fishing, you can improvise with fishing tackle. And if you happen to have them, I would recommend and have used large spoons with large treble hooks. It's preferable to use some more heavy-duty gear like casting gear with braided line. But if you don't have those things on hand, you can use other stuff as necessary, but with caution, right? A single hook, hook with a single tine is not going to be as effective at rounding up plants as a treble hook is. Spinning gear tends to be a little more slippy than casting gear, and things like monofilament lines are much more prone to abrasion and breaking, so you might lose tackle. So get the hardiest tackle that you can and the biggest, most hooky things that you can if you're going to improvise with fishing tackle, which I have. Let's talk a little about photographing aquatic things. Now, Marne covered this very nicely in the video. You can also, if you go to the EdMaps site with which GLEDN interacts, you will find some really nice general guidelines on photographing things there. I won't cover those general photography tips, but I will specify a little bit regarding aquatic plants. And I get a lot of pictures of aquatic plants, some that are completely useless for identification purposes. If you're one of those who have sent me useless photos, I'm sorry. I hope I have not insulted you, but take good photos, please. So first, I'm going to recommend that you select a background for contrast, white if available. If you happen to have for example, an enamel lab tray with a white field that you can take out there, that would be quite useful. Or just look around the land, or even a piece of white poster paper. Find some kind of background available on hand to provide as much contrast as possible, even if in the field. Array the specimen to capture identifying characteristics. So if you can get to the point where I can identify what it looks like where a leaf joins a stem, if I can count leaflets or pinnae on compound leaves, all of these things, the more detail that you can get and the better arrayed the specimen you can get, the better. Include some object of known size for scale. A coin, a ruler, a human hand, all of these are good. And in addition to capturing details of an individual specimen, pull back and let me see what that plant looks like growing on site, so I can get some idea of the growth form. While you're at it, take full advantage of the 5 photos that the EdMaps system will permit with an upload, right? So get as many photos of as many diverse aspects of the plant as you can in order to really capture the look of that specimen. Here are some photos that I think are pretty good, and I can get pretty close to a solid ID, at least to genus and very often to species, with something like this. Here are some photos that I've received that are perhaps not so good. So emulate this and not this. Let me talk very briefly about 3 species that will be added to the GLEDN app very soon, in particular because they are on the move in Ohio. First off, I'm going to refer to this field guide to aquatic invasive species. It's free. You can download a copy. I will post a link to the website where you can actually download copies of this book for free after I'm done speaking. But if you happen to catch me speaking when the world returns to some semblance of normalcy, I'd be happy to give you hard copies of this book as well. And I'm going to use this book kind of as a format for those few species I'm going to talk about. If you actually lay hands to the book, I want you to notice a couple things about the descriptions of species that you will find. So first is this icon. And if you see this icon, this is an organism that is new to the state or on the move and that you should report to officials or using the GLEDN app if you find this species. You will also find a really nice little kind of encyclopedic entry about what this species is and what other things it's similar to, but you'll also find some really nice line drawings that will idealize some of the identifying characteristics of this organism. And conveniently enough, the first I'm going to address will be European frogbit, okay? So European frogbit, it looks very similar to some of our native lilies, except it is much smaller. It is tiny in every dimension in comparison to our native water lilies. So the leaves are more rounded, and rarely do the leaves even exceed 2.5 inches. So the leaves are small, the flowers are almost always less than 1/2 inch across, 3 showy, very attractive white petals, but all very, very tiny in comparison to our native lilies. This typically forms single-sex stands, so it very rarely reproduces sexually. It almost always reproduces by vegetative structures, especially hardened structures called turions. As a stressful time approaches, a bit of the leaf and stem will form this hardened thing called a turion that can then drift away and take root someplace else as a new vegetative structure without any sexual reproduction. It has roots, but it tends to be free floating. Those roots don't really attach to the substrate. It really likes more calcium-rich water, and it can form really ugly monotypic stands that just completely choke out native vegetation and change how wetlands function. Now, its first report was in 2017, but I talked to one of our state botanists who says, oh man, I've been collecting that stuff for years on some of the islands. Well, that's nice, but if you don't tell anybody about it, for example, using a tool like the GLEDN app, then we can't know, right? So the first official report came in 2017, and at that time it was rather rare, at least on the mainland of Ohio's wetlands. But then by 2019, it had exploded. And a good example of this is the boardwalks out at McGee Marsh. So I am a pretty avid birder. I'm out there in 2018 and I see no European frogbit. In 2019, I see this. You can see those larger leaves in the distance. Those are white water lily, a native. Everything else is this very small leafed European frogbit, a really aggressive invader. It's amazing how prolific it is without sexual reproduction. Definitely one to watch for, and one that's only now being added to the GLEDN app because it's so recent. The next is yellow floating heart. And you can see some pictures here from the field guide. Again, similar to water lilies, but its leaves are a bit smaller. Its leaves get to be about 6 inches, and it will have 5 petaled flowers. That the most identifying characteristic of this plant is that these flowers have distinctively frilly margins that aren't quite like any of the flowers that we have on our native lily species. It has hairy seeds. It does often reproduce sexually, and its hairy seeds are picked up by waterfowl and other wildlife and very easily moved around. It persists using tuberous rhizomes on mudflats. It also forms dense monotypic stands that choke out our native plants, but more problematic with this plant is that the cupped leaves tend to pool and isolate stagnant water. So where it takes off, you very often have a proliferation of mosquitoes because those mosquitoes can use those little stagnant pools and cupped leaves to avoid predators. And the evasion, it was first introduced decades and decades ago as an ornamental because it's pretty. The invasion seems to have stalled, but then we had several reports again on the move in Ohio beginning in 2017 and every year since. So this is another one that's on the move recently. The last one is not a plant. So don't try to collect this using the techniques I discussed in collecting plants, but you might observe it, especially in the early summer when it makes an effort to spawn, because this is the oriental weatherfish, also known as a loach or a Japanese loach. And this is a popular aquarium pet that is sometimes released by people who keep them in aquaria. Notice that when the field guide was published, there was no Ohio range map because it had never been observed in Ohio. It is in a family that's related to minnows, but not quite minnows. It's the next family over from minnows, but it really doesn't look like any of our native species. It looks like a little bit like a minnow, but it has a form that would be described as vermiform or worm-like. So it's like a worm-like minnow. It also has very showy, very fleshy barbels around the mouth. So these really elongated eel-like, minnow-like things with whiskers, you're not going to mistake it for anything else if you come across it. First collected in Ohio in early summer of 2019, where 19 specimens were collected on an evidence spawning run. So it's likely that that population had been there and reproducing and wasn't noticed until 2019. And then there have been a handful of additional reports in Franklin County in 2020 to this point. If you're going to see this animal, it's going to be most likely on its spawning runs, typically at the very end of spring, beginning of summer, when it moves up into riparian areas that are flooded from nearby small organic rich streams. So it'll often be, as it's trying to come out of the stream bank to spawn, you will find it isolated in little pools at road crossings or things like that. They tend to become abundant once established, and we don't know much about the ecosystem effects yet. There's some possibility that they might display native fishes through competition. They may also feed on native fish eggs, but the kind of effects that they will have on the ecosystem aren't known yet, but we do want to know, is it spreading? So please use that GLEDN app and inform us. This is where you can reach me for details, but now I've arrived at the end of my part, and I will post a link to that field guide for aquatic invasive species.
All right, thanks, Eugene. So I'm going to finish us up with a little bit of information on wildlife species. I can find my PowerPoint. That's interesting. We'll try this. Sorry, PowerPoint is not showing up on the screen share, so I'm just having to open it up again. I love these technical difficulties. Here we go. Okay. Are you guys seeing my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So as I said, I wanted to just finish us up by talking a little bit on some of the terrestrial wildlife species that you can report using the app. And so on the left side of the screen, you'll see some of the species I'm going to address that are already on the app. And there's some good information for all those species if you want to learn more about them. So WNS in bats, that is, of course, white nose syndrome. Hopefully everybody on the call knows what that is. If you don't, it is a deadly disease of bats. It's caused by a non-native invasive fungus. And if you want to learn more, I'll have a great link at the end. You can feel free to reach out to me or go to that info button on the app to learn a little bit more. But we are looking to report any evidence of that as well. And next would be feral swine. So feral swine is also available to be reported in the app, and now it may not necessarily be the actual animal that you're reporting. It may be signs of damage. So pictures of damage that you suspect are due to feral swine are perfectly appropriate to report with the app. And so I guess just a little bit of background with feral swine. So the goal right now in Ohio is to eradicate the species from the state. So early detection of these pigs popping up in new areas especially is key. We do have some established breeding populations in the southern part of the state, and there's definitely work being done to eradicate those populations. So they reproduce really quickly, and so it doesn't take them very long to get a strong foothold in an area. That's why this, early detection is really key for these types of species. So any detection that is reported through the app on feral swine will come to me. Same with white nose syndrome. They're going to come to me, and just to be completely transparent, reports on those two species most likely will not end up on the map section of the app. And the reason for that, especially in the case of white nose syndrome, is it may not be a great idea to advertise where a cave that is infected with white nose syndrome is in the state. So it may not be in the best interest of the protection of those bat species. And the same could be said for feral swine. So while feral swine in the state, it's legal to hunt them, it's not the best management option. The best management option is to corral those species on your property, so you're using a trap to collect as many as you possibly can, and then euthanizing them to remove them from the landscape. So sometimes broadcasting the location of a feral swine may attract those of the hunting variety. And if the goal for that property owner is really to get the feral swine off of his property, hunting is not going to be the best management tool. So in the case of feral swine and white nose syndrome, what will most likely happen is those reports will come into me, and then I will reach out back to that reportee and just kind of talk to you about the situation, and if you want me to get you in touch with those entities working with the disease in case of white nose syndrome and feral swine, I can do that. So that's what would happen with those two species. Okay, so that was white nose syndrome and feral swine. Mute swans are also on the app to be reported. So just to give you a little background on those, if you're not familiar with them, they are a non-native species. They were brought into to North America around the mid 1800s to early 1900s. And they were brought in solely to decorate ponds on large estates and zoos and city parks. If you've seen mute swans, they're beautiful birds. I'll show you another picture here in just a minute. And it's easy to see why they were used as an addition to these ponds. And that's still where you're going to see many of them today. But over the years, escapees started establishing breeding populations, and now they're established and breeding across much of the country. And so the issue comes when they start competing for habitat with our native swans. And so you see two pictures of our native swans here, the tundra swan and the trumpeter swan. So the tundra swan right there on the left, they breed north of us. So we're not going to see those unless it's during migration time, as they're going to and from their breeding grounds. Now the trumpeter swan, we do have breeding here in Ohio. And the trumpeter swan is a good success story. So at one point in time, they were very close to extinction. They've come back, and now they have expanded their range and their breeding populations. And so we definitely want to continue promoting their populations and their breeding success here in Ohio, which is all the more reason to know where mute swans are and to work with those entities that own those mute swans and kind of talk to them about whether or not they should keep them or not. So a little bit of ID difference. The tundra swan on the left side has a little dot of yellow right in front of its eye on that black skin that leads into the bill. So that's a good identifying feature. Sometimes can be a little bit hard to see though. And then the trumpeter swan on the right has that just solid black bill and the solid black facial skin with no yellow dot. And then I'll just pop up that mute swan once again for comparison. And you'll notice right away that bright orange bill. So probably the easiest way to identify them. They have that little black knob on their facial skin, and that definitely is more apparent on males during the breeding season. But one other little interesting tidbit about mute swans that I'll throw in there is that they can actually adapt in wetland habitats that have been degraded by another invasive species, the common reed or Phragmites. So what actually happens is, as the reeds spread into those lakes and ponds, the swans can actually build their nests further offshore into the reeds, and those reeds actually act to protect their nests from predators. So just an interesting relationship involving two invasive species that I wanted to share. Okay, so that's what is on the app available for reporting. A few things that are coming soon that I wanted to share with you would be some information on the Asian jumping worm and the European nightcrawler, and I'll go into that here in just a minute. They're both already available on the app for reporting, but as far as learning more about them and getting more information, that is not there. So I'm going to be working on that. And then we're also going to be adding black vultures. So I'll talk first on the worms. So the jumping worm, if I'll draw your attention to the left side of the screen, known as Asian jumping worms. They're also, you might have heard them called crazy worms or snake worms or Alabama jumpers. And that is definitely specifically due to their activity. So as far as identification, the jumping worms tend to be a little bit sleeker and not as firm as the nightcrawler, which is pictured there on the right side. And the way they move is very different. So our nightcrawler has that kind of wriggly type of movement, whereas the jumping worm, it can jump. It thrashes violently. It whips around, sometimes quite alarmingly if you can look at videos online. But it really does make you think kind of like of snake-like movements, hence its nickname, the snake worm. And then the other really key identifying feature, the one that I think is really kind of the snapshot ID, would be the clitellum, which is that band of skin on the upper half of the worm. On the jumping worm, you see it's a tan, light, kind of creamish, tannish color. And on the nightcrawler, it is a pink color. So why are we reporting on these worms? Well, a little bit of the history. So the Asian jumping worm is native to Eastern Asia, and they were likely introduced into the United States quite a while ago. And it's believed that they have now at this point spread over the Eastern US. But research specifically in the Great Lakes area, Wisconsin specifically, excuse me, they've begun documenting the presence of both the nightcrawler and jumping worm, due to the problems that they can create. So even though the distribution of many of our worms are throughout large parts of the United States, especially here in the East, it doesn't mean that they are necessarily in every garden and forest and natural area, if that makes sense to you. So people have definitely started looking for them due to some of these negative impacts that they're causing. So what are those negative impacts? Bottom line is they can degrade soil quality. And we see the impacts are greater with the jumping worms. So they're degrading soil quality kind of to the point where the soil is inhospitable to some of our native plants and our garden plants and our ornamentals. The European nightcrawler, we've seen some negative effects when it comes to soil quality as well, but not quite as bad as the jumping worm. So with the nightcrawler, we've seen those negative impacts documented in our more natural, in some of our natural areas like our forests. So here in Ohio, there's been some work done in northeastern Ohio in the Cleveland Metro Parks, where they've noticed some degradation of the soil in the forest community within the forests. So in those areas that are heavily impacted by those night crawlers, we tend to see less leaf litter, which, if you're familiar with that, is kind of an ecosystem within itself. And it really does have an impact on that entire forest community. So I know you probably have a lot of questions about these guys, and sometimes it's confusing when you hear about these invasive worms, because maybe growing up you learned about the advantages of earthworms and worms in the soil. I know I did. I learned, I grew up learning that earthworms were beneficial for the soil, and that is still true, especially for the nightcrawler. I think in soils that are heavily compacted, like we tend to see in some of our agricultural fields and sometimes in our garden sites as well, they can really help to aerate the soil. But in other environments like the forests, they can cause some issues. And then the jumping worm seemed to be having some impacts throughout, you know, in our garden sites and our natural sites. So research is still coming. It's still going on with these two invasive species. So I don't want to panic you, but I do encourage you to learn more about them. And I'll give you some two websites at the end of this presentation that have just phenomenal information so you can learn more. But you know, it's a good idea to start reporting these if you're doing some work in the yard, digging around, or in the areas that you manage to keep your eye out for, especially the jumping worm. Okay, I'll finish talking a little bit about our vultures. And so I want to stress here, we've largely been talking about non-native invasive species. And the black vulture and the turkey vulture I have here as a comparison for ID, both of these are native and they're not invasive, though some people may argue with me on that one. But remember, this app is the early detection network. So we want to be able to use this app to detect native and non-invasive species as well. And I think the black vulture is a great example of that. So black vultures have been expanding their abundance and their range over the past 30 years, and that includes here in Ohio. So we've been getting them in accounts of them in our southern counties for several years now, and their range is expanding up northward through the state. So researchers are tracking that expansion, and certain interest groups are as well. So livestock producers are definitely tracking their expansion because that ties into one of the conflicts that we really have with black vultures. So we all know that our vultures eat dead animals, right? And that holds true for both the black vulture and the turkey vulture. But what black vultures may also do is attack live animals, specifically calves, lambs, piglets, and other weak animals. So they can end up causing some serious losses to our livestock producers. In addition, they can cause damage to homes. So they like to pick and tear at different parts of our properties. So window caulking, roof shingles, on cars, they like to pick at wiper blades or the rubber liner around your, the seal around your window. So there's some other instances where they can cause property damage as well. So bottom line, we're just really trying to track this species as it moves up into the state to get a better handle on where they're showing up. So just really quickly, some differences on the ID between these two. You've probably noticed quite a few as I've been talking. So the black vulture has this kind of grayish to black head, whereas our turkey vulture does have the red head. And then the legs are different colors as well. We see white, which stand out very well if you see it in a sitting position on the black vulture, and then pink legs on the turkey vulture. And then they're pretty easy to identify in flight as well. And maybe you've already figured out which of those birds in flight goes to which species. So that's the black vulture, and this one right here is the turkey vulture. So the black vulture has those white wingtips, whereas all the flight feathers on the turkey vulture are kind of that lighter gray color. Okay. I just wanted to pop this picture up here because it does apply specifically to Southern Ohio. So I believe it's West Virginia's USDA Wildlife Services program is tagging black vultures. And I believe it's again due to kind of track their movements and their expansion. And so some of their vultures have been showing up in Ohio, and they have these red tags on their wings. So if you see something like this, you can report it in the app with a picture if you can get it, and then I will pass it on to the proper authorities. Or if you want, you can report it directly to USDA Wildlife Services in West Virginia with the website that is on the screen right there, reportband.gov. Last but not least, I do want to draw attention to one category under the species category, and it's that last one. Oops. Right there, unknown. So yes, that is a picture of Bigfoot, kind of a little bit of humor by the app creator. But this is a category if you want to use it when you just don't know. So I thought I'd just bring that up. If you have an unknown plant or unlisted animal, you can kind of pop it into the app if you have a question. This is a popular feature I know with like iNaturalist. You know, you see something and you want to know what it is. So if you feel the burning need to use that feature, you can. Or if you want to report Bigfoot, you can do that too. So here is a little bit more information on some of the different species I presented info with today. And I will pop these links into the chat box so you can get direct access to them. And there's my information. That's just a little blog that I have created, and I will try to share some of the same links through this presentation there as well. I'm going to stop sharing and get those resources in the chat box.
Okay, so I'm going to share just a few more slides. Kind of give you an idea of what we see on the other end. So if you're using this on your computer, EdMaps has a great website. You can see up top here report sightings. You can look at distribution maps. When you create your username and password, you have an My EdMaps that will keep all of your records in one place. I wanted you to see there's the web reporting. So if you don't do it on your phone, just go to your computer. If you need to download some data, you can access the data that's put into the database. And you can also, if you work for an entity that's been collecting data that you would like to upload into this system, so it's all in one place. We've worked with some entities to do bulk data uploads so that there's kind of maybe a hub for a lot of the data that some of us are creating. So this is just a screenshot of what, if you do this on your computer instead of on the app like Marnie showed you, you're still going to need, your lat and long so that you know where you were when you saw whatever you're trying to report. And then there's the section on tools and training. One of the things I wanted to point out, those of you that work for maybe a state entity or something, there is an option here that you can view invasive species by congressional district. And so if that's something that comes up, know that the data that is in here, you can go in and query. You can look at states, you can look at counties. There's some good training materials here. So a lot of good stuff that they've got in their on their website. So I wanted to show you, this is a report that comes in. So when the emails end up in my box or one of our boxes, and I firmly will admit right here and now that I am way behind on verifying reports, so be patient with me. You would think while we're all locked down at home, we have unlimited amount of time to go through stuff, and that doesn't seem to be that way. But this is what I see when it comes in. And I can kind of get a quick overview when it was looked at. I've got an email that if I have questions about the record, that's the nice thing with you being logged in. I can come back and say, hey, I've got some questions, and I've had to do that for some reports. We get a Google Earth view. There's where the report was, the photo that was uploaded for the report. And so this is really great. I've had some where I've had a plant reported and I've zoomed in on the Google Earth image and it's like, I want to know more. I want to know, did this come out of the landscape? Was this out in a native area? And so sometimes those are the questions that we have to ask before we go and verify some things. And when I get down to the bottom of that, you can see there's a whole host of options, and you can upload additional images if you want to. I can request images, so maybe you sent me one or two and they're not quite distinctive enough for me to say yay or nay. I can request you to send us some more images. And usually I end up going to review and release, unless you've indicated that you don't want your record released to the map in general. And then here's what I fill out. Verification method, that's usually photos. your name and date kind of goes in here. And then, you know, the credibility of the identification. When I look at it, do I just go ahead and verify it? There are some that I sometimes look at and I'm 90% certain that it's good, but there's an option in here for credible. And so I may go that route instead of completely verified. The source ID is just, you know, do you work for a state agency? Do you work for the university? And there's the show record, hide record. I can put comments in for you if I think that we need some, and then hit submit. And then that's when we put the dot on the map. And so one thing I wanted to show, if you're wanting to go back in and look at things, you can look for distribution maps on this EdMap site. And you can narrow it down. I'm always glad that these kind of wildlife are not the ones we're trying to report in Ohio. I'll leave the snakes down to the Florida folks. You know, pick your plant if that's the route you're going. And then you can search, just type in the plant and it will pop up. And then you can get some info on it. You can see some more pictures. And then you can also look at the records. So if I go into Ohio and I look for Tree of Heaven, I can go in and I know that there's, let's say, 100 dots on the map. I can go in and look at all of those sites to see if there's something there that has already been reported. Maybe someone close by reported what you were looking at. So you can always check out that kind of stuff if that's something you're interested in. So the EdMap site, over and above having the data, it's got a lot of great tools if you're out there really looking for things. And so here are a couple of links. The go.osu one will take you to the Bugwood site where you can download either Apple or Android. And you can kind of see this little advertisement here at the bottom. This I pulled right off of the Bugwood site. So if you go either one of these, that's what's going to pop up when you get to the Great Lakes Early Detection Network. And with that, let me stop share. Get out of that.
So we do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Just to let everybody know, we all of us have kind of been answering questions throughout the presentation. So if you did ask a question, just open up the Q&A box and then you'll see some spots and one says answered, and I'm pretty sure you all can access that so you can check to see if your question was answered. But ones we haven't gotten to yet, Dana asks, on location, what is the best to use? Proper name, street address, or coordinates?
I don't know that it, you know, if you put an address, if you put a street address in, that's going to pop up on a map as well. If you're already using your GPS on your phone, the coordinates will be attached to the photo, the lat and long.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it matters, but the lat and long we have to have. I mean, that is one of the things that we have to have in order to put the dots on the map. So it's not like I've got a couple of presentations that I've done where I actually did the report for a plant in my office in Cotman Hall. And so when the map comes up, it's Cotman Hall, and that, you know, so you have to think about that. You want to make certain that you are where you saw whatever you saw. So if you're not there when you put it in, you need the lat and long, or you need to look at an address in order to make certain that the point goes in the right place.
When I was doing some things for spotted lanternfly, there was no like physical address. It was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And so I kind of got creative and described the location. So that's a reminder to me too, when I go back to do hopefully the negative reports, then that description, oh, yep, that's where I need to go next.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Yeah. Okay, so Carrie, hi Carrie, asked about, she'd like to learn more about uploading bulk data from iNaturalist and Excel data to GLEDN and EDD maps. I'm not familiar with that. Anybody else?
So the bulk data is like a spreadsheet. You know, if you've got your data in a spreadsheet, we can I've done it with a couple of entities where I've just sent it to Chuck at Bugwood and they upload it. I haven't checked out their link on their newly designed website to see whether they now have an option where we can upload it. The iNaturalist stuff, I know Eugene's been getting some iNaturalist things to verify. And when I talked to Chuck at Bugwood, he said that iNaturalist had reached out to GLEDN to create a cross database, and they needed folks to help verify some things. So I know Eugene had you had quite a few, didn't you, aquatic things there for a while?
So somebody at an administrative level is automatically transferring invasive things from iNaturalist to EdMaps. I don't know where that decision's being made, but it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. Okay.
So if you want, Carrie, let me know and we can explore that. I think that we either work with Chuck directly or I'll check out the new link for the bulk data and we'll see if we can make it happen.
Okay, another question, should invasives be sold at store, or should invasives being sold at stores be reported?
So I don't know how I mean, the reality is the ones that aren't supposed to be sold are on the state's invasive plant list. Those are the ones that it's illegal to sell in the state of Ohio. There are things, I mean, we can use calorie pear as the example. So it's going to go on the invasive plant list here, what, 2 years? Maybe? I don't remember what the date is. So it can still be sold. But at some point that trigger happens. They gave it 5 years from when they created the list. So right now, you know, entities can sell them. We'd like them not to, but when it hits that state official invasive plant list, then it's illegal for them to sell them.
I'd like to augment that a little, right? So the GLEDN app is a very useful tool, and it lists a lot of things that are non-native and potentially invasive, but invasive usually carries some kind of legal connotations. So don't use the species that are listed by the GLEDN app as a guide for what to report. Instead, defer to law for what to report if you see something for sale. So the Department of Agriculture has created a blacklist of plant species that are forbidden to trade hands. The Division of Wildlife has a much smaller list, but something that's similar, and that mostly applies. They mostly apply that through, for example, aquaculture licenses, things that are more restricted in the ability to raise, but you'll have to be familiar with what is legal and not, and that is only going to be a subset of what's listed by the GLEDN app.
And remember that the GLEDN app is a regional app, and so it's a Great Lakes. You're going to see things on there that we don't talk about in Ohio. But I've always said none of these invasive plants recognize state borders. So if you look and something's being reported in Indiana and Pennsylvania, the odds are it traveled through Ohio. So we need to keep that in mind, but it is a regional app. So there is stuff on there that we don't usually talk about.
And last question, how do GLEDN and EDD maps interface? Are they different apps for the same database?
So GLEDN is the app, the reporting part, and EdMaps is the database. And so they have a lot of different apps, but they all feed into EdMaps. So think of EdMaps as that big database that's collecting everything, but GLEDN is the tool that we use to put data into that database.
EdMaps is, yeah, that's a good answer, Kathy. EdMaps is the database, but it does have some interfaces, but the interfaces, frankly, be clunkier than the interfaces. So I would use the apps to supplement EdMaps. And so consider GLEDN an app that interfaces the database of EdMaps.
Okay, that works well. Any other questions? Okay, so Marnie, stop recording.
Okay. Thanks for we're gonna share our credits now for continuing ed. So we're going to stop the recording, but thanks for joining in. And if you need credits, don't go anywhere.